whole lot of mayors who may question them. So therefore, we have to take decentralization in steps, in step with the political situation. That's what I think. So to go right now into deep decentralization, into deep technically driven decentralization and fiscal transfer systems may not work, because to make it work, you need political empowerment, and that's not going to happen very soon.
Just one two-hander, and then I'll hand it over to Arun. Would you say if there is a constitutional amendment for GST, to ask for a minuscule part of that to go to local governments, is that acceptable in the political reality of today, do you think?
It may, yes.
Yeah.
Ishar, I was, getting my hands up as you were speaking, because what you were asking was that something deeper is coming out, as Paul was concluding, and we need to take that forward. And I was so happy that you said that. As you were saying that, I'm your friend, right? And I'll give you the mic, hit me with it if you feel offended, but that's not the thing, right? You mentioned that he ended with a truism that, have a local diagnostic and stuff. But let's get to the real stuff. But I would say if it's a truism, it is the real stuff. So why don't we explore that further? And there could be a reason that we don't explore that further is that, as they say about finding the key under the lamp, is that I want to come back to my area, my discipline, and look at this situation through that again. Whereas someone's pointing out that maybe the solution is outside the domain of my usual exploration and my expertise. That's one. Second, you did say quite rightly about the PPP as a passing thing to say our prejudices. And that's indeed true. That and I'm talking about now our dialogues together. So we have to find a solution together. We take positions and we somehow reinforce in our mind the other's position, and the reaction, our own position. And so we've got the market and pro-market and not market, and growth and not growth. We've got in our country a pro-PPP, and as you heard, many people, and we are all pro-PPP actually, what we are saying is you can't have a simple one-size-fits-all solution to it. And look at a diagnostic, again, of the situation, and just open your mind, and we might get a solution. So I just keep hearing in dialogues, actually, these sort of phrases, which I know that I'm getting now, saying I must defend myself because you presume that I'm on this side, which I'm not really. And I've taken the courage to explain what's happening to me. Otherwise, I would actually start defending my anti-PPP position, and then we'll get a divide over here.
No, I will not hit you with the mic, yeah. And what I was trying to say was, just as we are all agreed that motherhood is good for us, similarly, we are all agreed that we must always go for diagnostics. I mean, there's no scope for argument there, The question is,
Why isn't it done?
Exactly. No. But you see, we are talking of general patterns beyond that. When we were doing the high-powered expert committee, I distinctly recollect a discussion with a former Secretary Urban Development, not Mr. Ramachandran, it was someone else by the time we had got to that stage. And he said to me that you are talking about, decentralizing, giving this responsibility to the urban local government, that responsibility. But do you realize that in most of the cities of Bihar, we have half an engineer and a quarter of an accountant at an urban local government? Who is going to do this? Who is going to do PPP and all? And it was because of a lot of discussions like that that we came to the conclusion that first, a certain oxygen has to flow in terms of finances through these urban local bodies. And that's why I asked Barjot the question, because knowing that politically it's not an easy thing to do, but could we hitch our wagon to the GST, for which the time will come, because the state governments have seen the benefit of that, And, you know, given the importance of services in our economy, today or tomorrow, you will actually have a constitutional amendment when the states come together with the center for GST. And even a 0.25% of that tax will give them that basic backbone to stand up and try to, do these things. So I just felt that if we close all doors, PPP is not possible, decentralization, funding devolution is also not good, then how are we going to address this challenge? And that's where I would welcome any more comments. Yeah.
We actually tried. We didn't have GST in Tanzania, and I think Anuradha would know this because she has worked on Tanzania. Is that since there was no such a GST, we tried because they have a very good system of cell phones, and the cell phone talk time is, everybody has a cell phone. Almost everybody has a cell phone now. It's about 70 to 80% penetration in that country. And so, and the talk time, the government taxes very heavily, and it's known. You can actually localize the collection because from cell tower data, you can actually figure out which area is talking more to which other area. And we tried to work with a system to have a share in the tax of the talk time. It just didn't work because the central government, that was their biggest source of income outside of the other customs taxes, that they would not give it away. It's not an easy task.
No, I think, just going back to comments that I made, the tax base in urban areas is actually very attractive potentially to tax, at least not in Bihar probably, I don't know enough about Bihar urban areas, because a lot of rich people live in urban areas and a lot of the surpluses that rich people in other places gain come to urban areas. Now the problem is, again, this is in the form of rents. So if you look at how urban taxation has evolved in different cities, one of the ways that you do tax rents is by taxing things that are scarce and are consumed by rich people. And a very good example of that, grotesquely undertaxed in this city, is parking space. So, is advertising in urban agglomerations. So the number of, if you're talking about getting the oxygen flowing and getting a permanent tax base in place, then actually the fact that we're a large economy where rich people increasingly agglomerate in the urban areas means that some of these taxes belong in the urban domain. Now some of them, as you were rightly pointing out, motor vehicles is obvious, is perhaps politically infeasible given the restrictions in the central government base. That perhaps requires us to look at whether we need the Finance Commission, perhaps the 15th one, to look at intergovernmental assignments and their architecture afresh, recognizing that urbanization is now creating areas which ipso facto over a period of time may have a tax base that allows them to function. On the GST, very briefly, it would be a very good idea, like human civilization if implemented, if the relevant taxing unit, the city, also had a say in the rate of taxation, now that we have decided that the state government will have a say. If we don't have it, it doesn't matter. Then I would rather have a devolution of the income tax. It really doesn't matter which tax you devolve, we're just talking about a devolution there. So if they don't actually have a say in how the tax is set, then in practice, the ownership that comes with that devolution may not be there. That's my only concern. Otherwise, in general, a 3-tier devolution of the divisible pool is not a bad idea.
Ma'am, I think impression seems to have been created that, or seems to have gathered that PPP is not possible. I don't think, ma'am, that's the case that we are talking about. If you really go back to your own HPC, you have set the range of PPP. The problem, if you really see the statement of Mr. Haldia and Mr. Bhal, one hand does not see another. Mr. Bhal says there are 53 PPP projects in the JNRM. Mr. Haldia says there is not a single project in the JNRM. Both of them are very informed human beings. The only thing I'm saying is the definition of PPP by these two gentlemen is entirely different. Mr. Haldia's definition of PPP is what Ministry of Finance definition of PPP, where you need to get 20% of the VGF, and Mr. Bhal's definition of PPP is where concessionaire has come with some form of arrangement. Now, what you have said in your decision, that India has to look into a spectrum of PPP projects, and if you really look at the water supply scenario, there were, one day we did a study and we saw 11 projects. Only 3 of them, the concessionaire brought the capital. Remaining everywhere is where in the nature of bringing the efficiency. But that leads to a greater governance issue here. And that governance issue seems to be that which projects run better in India, where I think the decision-making power, it lies more with the CEO and he is far more safeguarded from the general influence of all kinds of government functionaries. There we find that a great deal of efficiency comes. So actually it doesn't matter whether it is the government which is funding the project or it is the private which is funding the project. It is a larger question of governance, where it is, if you give a decision making power to a CEO, then he can run it much better. Metro is a very good example. DMRC is a good example.
Just a very, very quick point. I mean, first of all, let me be clear, Ishir. I am pro-decentralization, I am pro-own source revenue, and I am pro-PPP. I am anti-bad decentralization, haphazard use of own source revenues, and poorly designed, implemented PPPs. That was really my point. And in fact, the point I was making, the point you were making about South Africa and India, there's an extremely important point embedded in that. The problem that I described in Indonesia, the rejection of a potentially important own source revenue, is a result of a system flaw. Some local governments get a lot more revenue from transfers than they need, and they have no incentive to collect local taxes. And a governance flaw, they could actually use that revenue and more, but people aren't demanding the services that in fact are the legal responsibility of local government and the citizens are entitled to. In the South Africa case, you have what appears to be a better developed system, but the reason is the origins of the system. Indonesia's decentralization law was developed after the Asian financial crisis and the fall of Suharto in less than 6 months as a strategy to hold the system together after East Timor voted itself out of the country, and with the vice president who took over from Suharto trying to win an election. So they pushed through something that was badly thought out and too rapid. Whereas in South Africa, you had a massive political change, but there was also the space to develop a system. Before they developed their decentralization policy, they spent 3 years traveling around to every local government in every part of the country, getting feedback and developing a paper which is still not fully implemented. And so they had the luxury, it was a very different situation, but the point that I think it's more successful is that it was carefully staged and planned and based on a lot of diagnostics. And chain adaptation based on, they didn't jump into everything all at once. And one other interesting factoid around what you said, Indonesia has more stable finances than South Africa does. Indonesia guarantees a certain percentage of revenue by law, a certain percentage of national revenue goes into the transfer pool. South Africa, it's an annual decision of the parliament, something that all fiscal decentralization people hate. But because the country is so committed to the reform, they increase the funding or keep it stable every year. But the system could fall apart in a second if a government were elected that was anti-local government. And the very last point, my point wasn't that we shouldn't be bringing on some of the taxes, the new taxes. My point was that there's too much of a tendency in fiscal decentralization to do new things without fixing problems with the things that exist. And so in some places that are using local revenues better, start new ones. But in other places, try to get things working that are already in place before you bring on more things that are going to be subject to the same pressures that are undermining the collection of the existing revenue sources. The same thing for training programs. Some ministry wants to do a training program. Some donor comes in with huge pots of money. Let's do a training program. What does it add? How does it relate to what's there? That was really my point.